Hey, it is really great to be here to critique and go through and learn from this first exercise for which you had no preparation whatsoever. So we knew that the challenges here were going to be keying without having had any formal instruction from me on how to do it, as well as things like areas of contact with the arm and the floor. And then, of course, there was the design component. And as we go through these, you're going to see that most of the students personalized the design of the scene in one way or another. Some of them by animating it, others by rearranging it or using some depth of field type of effects. And that's great. I really love that. And I think as you go through the course and you make the work your own and even get it to a point where you could put it on your reel, I think it's really great to create something that looks uniquely yours, because at the end of the day, you are your own creative director on these. So without further ado, let's take a look at these examples. I've numbered them. So a first example that has a very common problem that we saw here, which was a matte line where the key was at least loose enough to preserve some edge detail. So the key in this case is right here in the root comp, so I can toggle it on and off. And you can see that the background color, even after color adjustment, is darker. And look at just the hair, and you can see we're losing maybe a pixel or two up there. So we could actually do better preserving the soft areas of the hair, but we're not really ruining the look. However, we do have this matte line. One solution for this by a different student, and here I have this proxy, so where I had a render to throw in as a proxy, I went ahead and did it so that I could just scrub through and see it. Here we see the unnatural effect of too much choking of the matte. So the head's looking a little bit alien, but the matte line is gone. So in a sense, that's good. There's also some issues happening here. So the motion blur is kind of being fought with here. And you don't want to get into a fight with motion blur, because motion blur can actually make your key look awesome. But here we're losing detail. All right, so back over here, I do want to show you a quick hack. I don't recommend it exactly, but if you found yourself in a jam with a situation like this, because this particular scene shows this really actually maybe even better than what we had in the lesson. So this was a kind of a difficult key because of this matte line situation combined with the motion blur. I just want to show you, this is also an exemplary scene in that it uses key light, key cleaner, and spill suppressor, which really are the three pro tools built into After Effects for keying, and they will get the job done. There's a curves effect that I can't tell if it's doing anything, but I am going to add to this a matte tool. So under the matte category, I'm going to go with Refine Hard Matte. And instantly the matte line is gone. And additionally, if we look at the alpha channel, and I just solo the layer because otherwise there's nothing to see, you can see that we've actually inadvertently solved a different problem, which I didn't point out, which is that this is not a really, whoops, I just moved my layer. This is not a completed matte. So there's a lot of holes in this matte. And so we fixed that, which is not ideal. But let's say that even those holes weren't there, because you're going to see this matte line in almost all the examples that I'm going to show you. So this would solve that. If we look really closely at the edge, by default, it's messing with the edge a little bit. So let's turn feather to 0. And let's also go here. I don't like it when I scrub controls and downgrade the resolution. So I'm just going to change adaptive resolution in this little menu right here to final quality. And I'm going to change reduce chatter, set that to 0. So I've zeroed out now these controls, and that reintroduced those holes, but that's okay, because what I'm really trying to do is stop messing with the matte itself still getting messed with a bit. So I need to go under motion blur and just turn it off. And so now I'm not messing with the mat at all. I am, however, solving that edge, almost. So the mat line is gone, but look at her sleeve over here. There's this little thing that pops in because what it's doing is sampling the edge and going, okay, I'm gonna fill with the edge. So where we go from skin to shirt, we're getting this little tag here. Now, that might not seem so bad, like, okay, there's a little stain on her shirt or something. Not really what I wanted, but better than a matte line. It does kind of just suddenly pop on. So there it's not there, and it's suddenly gonna pop on this frame. Not really ideal. So as I said, this is more of a break glass in case of emergency type of measure to quickly select the edge and take control of that matte line. Here's another example where similarly we have a matte line problem. With this one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about project organization. So when a layer name is not helpful, that may be okay with you. But if you're in a situation where anybody else is likely to open your project, you probably want to do better. In fact, I'm just going to say you definitely want to do better. But there's a little bit more to this one. So I dig down, and now I just want to isolate where is the key happening, and I can't tell where it is. So I have middle ground highlighted because I was exploring already, and by soloing each layer, I can figure out like, okay, yeah, it's that one. Keep going. You can see my cheats already where I figured out which layer is which, but we're now 3 deep, and we still are not on the key layer. And that's not necessarily bad, although I think 4, 5 layers is a heck of a lot, and we're still not there. So in this final 6th deep layer, we get to where the key is happening. Now, here we have a multi-pass key, and that part I think is great. So here's a fill layer, and if we look at the Uber key, what happened, this is brute force roto, which the previous shot we looked at also had to do that fill. That's certainly a way to do it, given that we had green detail on the apron. We'll get into more ways to solve problems like that again in the lesson. But here we also have a separate pass just to fill and then have the external key. One thing I noticed here is they're not quite in harmony. So you can see a little matte hole here. So the matte didn't quite do the job. Sometimes it's outside, like here. It's outside the area that you want to be covering, and now it's kind of inside. So just wanted to point that out. Regarding project organization, I'm going to not harp on that too much, but you're going to see my demonstration projects be quite a bit more, shall we say, efficient. And I know motion graphics, I mean, the great thing is you can work really fast, and it doesn't matter if you have a lot of pre-comps. In visual effects, I'm going to give you 2 separate messages that seem to be conflicting one another. One is go ahead and pre-comp when an element is done. And the other one is to keep your number of layers and pre-comps down to kind of a logical level. And the reason for that is you just do a certain amount of problem solving here. And it just helps if you don't have to dig around and guess what things are. And again, other people you work with will also appreciate it. So now let's talk about points of contact and some other design details. There was a decision you had to make about how the arm is contacting with the cue. And this right here, initially I was drawn to because it's like, well, that's accurate. She was actually leaning on that stack of Apple boxes covered in green. So theoretically that was correct, but actually the thing was perpendicular, and you get this big indentation of the arm where there would have been a square corner there. Whereas here, it just looks a little painful. Like, it looks uncomfortable seeing her arm indent like that. So it's something about the angle. It kind of looks like it's cutting into her arm, and the shadow and the way it kind of shows up is just a little weird. There's soft shadows otherwise, and there's this hard shadow. And that sounds really nitpicky, but it drew my eye. Like this right here, I could accept as being pretty good. And then this comes in, and it just, you got to be careful of things that draw your eye like that, which points of contact and motion will do. In this example, there seems to be some sort of recess, almost like there's a facade on the cue, and then there's like an inch drop before the arm goes in there. So that's not necessarily a really good compromise either. Just kind of getting it to lay in there. That one looks a little recessed. This one I think looks pretty good in that I could imagine there being about that amount of compression on the arm. That one's way inside. I think somewhere in the middle of where it's kind of a reasonable amount of compression on the arm is pretty good. So actually that was the compromise most students made, and that's okay. By the way, there are different types of animations going on here. I'm just going to scrub through to show you this kind of reveal that was done here. And do be careful with things like softness. So the sewing machine is notably very soft, and photographically it should be like a mile away and maybe 500 feet tall to be that soft. And of course, as a designer, you can do what you want. I'm talking about what even the average layperson would look at and go, that doesn't look quite right. So again, the scissors and whatever this thing is over here are pretty much coplanar, although the scissors are also planar with her and these the skein of thread here. So this should go soft there, but that's not what I'm suggesting you do, because this looks way too soft. It's maybe slightly forward, and for that to be soft and these to also be soft that are right behind her means there's some extremely shallow depth of field going on here, which I think just is not supported. I mean, geez, if it was that shallow, the monkey would be kind of partly going out. I don't know. It's a cool look theoretically. And overall, I think this is a good looking frame for color and composition, but I don't think the depth of field is working. One thing I do think is working here is the contact of the feet with the ground. And what's working about them is they don't call my attention. So if we look at this example, and by the way, never name a comp at its default of comp 1. Don't ever do it. I've known employers who say, it's an immediate firing offense if I get any comps back that say comp 1. So just don't do it. And here we have no contact with the ground, and she looks like she's floating. The Q logo had a bit of a shadow. There's no real distance between these feet and the floor, and therefore you need what are called contact shadows. Now I've highlighted them here in the timeline. I have this proxied, so let me turn off the proxy for a moment, and we'll just see how simply you can solve that. If she was moving around left to right with feet on the floor, you could cut out her key and isolate her feet, make them black and move them down a few pixels. And that could be one way. But, there's an awkwardness with doing that because the movement actually should be in opposition. So as she raises her toe, that should actually make the shadow even maybe move the other way, which this animation is doing a little bit. Anyway, the point there, and with the depth of field, is just don't draw our attention to something that's clearly really wrong. Okay, again, very soft sewing machine. I know that was there in one of the Photoshop comps, but something you're going to want to manage. Monkey kind of comes peeking in here. That's a cute idea. This one made a stronger choice, just turning the background white, kind of refreshing. I think that the composition and the depth of field is really good here. Shadow's not really working, but there was kind of a decision to just sort of punt. Actually, there is a bit of a contact shadow there. I'm not convinced by it. And this key is probably the most successful overall. And I will point out, if I dig in here, that this did make use of a animated fill mat for the skirt. And on the master, there is that refine hard matte trick to get rid of matte lines. If we look at just the alpha channel, you can see that refine matte effect does break this a little bit. So it wasn't set down to 0 the way I did. It actually had additional feather to soften what was a pretty hard matte, and you pay a price with this tool. So if you're gonna use it with a key, you gotta zero it out the way that I said, or you're gonna start to see stuff like that. But in any case, this person seemed a little bit more comfortable with key light and did some adjustment of the screen matte controls, as we will do in next week's lessons. So that's kind of it overall. And again, commendable job, everyone, for doing this. And I encourage you maybe to put this away for now, but in a few weeks' time, I think you could probably, in a very short order, refine what you did and get it into what would look much more like an actual ident piece, if you want that for your reel or just for the satisfaction of having completed it.
Hi again. It's Nate again, and it will continue to be Nate every time this happens, every episode. So get used to it. Viva Las Vegas, our beautiful traffic jam and hallucination exercise, brought to you by Santa, apparently, because the very beginning you hear what sounds to me every time like, move, move, move. Ho, ho, ho. By the way, this is our example from Andrea. Sorry, I'm talking over it. All right, let's take another look at that, because I was rudely interrupting the beginning of this whole deal. The third shot of the project is where things start to happen. I pointed out to a lot of you in the feedback that it's a fairly common thing to forget to mask out this light post. And I think we will see an example of somebody who forgot to do that, it's very common, so don't feel too bad if you forgot. Andrea has masked out our light post, which is one of the nice little touches that helps to kind of convincingly give the illusion that the video that you've composited is actually in the space. We've got a bit of blurring going on the top of the billboard that's not looking 100% right, but we will live with it. This isn't really the place to critique anyway. All right, here's our money shot. Here is where things are going on. This is a pretty straightforward version of this shot. We've got our sign, we've got our background elements, we've got the tiger sitting perched on the billboard. It looks really nice. And that there is the one little glitch here in the bottom left-hand corner of the water that's in front of the bus, which shouldn't be happening, but that's also not a super noticeable thing on the first watch. Color balance is working pretty nicely across the frame. Oh, the tiger is losing his nose here for a second, so I guess we got to look out for that. Okay, and on this last shot, I believe this was one of the examples of somebody giving up on the money partway through because they'd already devoted so much time to trying one method, which I think most of you opted to try with the roto brush and then discovered that was a really bad thing. Meaning the roto brush is not a bad effect, but it is very limited in its usefulness. It's really only good for hair, at least in my experience. Something that's rapidly moving and changing shape, like the dollars, like the dollar bills, that is going to drive you insane if you try to do it. And I think many of you actually did try to do it, so I guess I'm talking to a bunch of insane people now, because good grief, that is an awful, awful, awful thing to deal with. So I think most people ended up opting for manual masking. It's a lot of work, but in some cases, it's still like the best way to go. All right, I'm liking what Andrea's done with the background. There's a nice blur going on. It's integrated well. Masks along the car are pretty good. Other than the money, this shot is working really well. So good job to Andrea. Moving on. Okay, Audra has a nice little surprise waiting for us. Let's just watch hers through. Whoa. Did you see it? Our friend El Tigre is riding on the bus, which I think is a delightful idea and a fun way to play with our dream sequence shot here. Very nice. One of the things I like about this example is the kind of subdued colors. It's kind of a turquoise, like a pale turquoise blue and a coral pink palette, which kind of makes me think of film from like the 60s. Our Vegas sign is maybe a little bit dark here, but I'm not too concerned about that. The integration of the foreground and background, there's a little fringing on the leaves here. That could be tightened up a little bit perhaps, but it's a very small detail in a very insignificant portion of the frame here. And our money roto is on the money, I would say. That looks really nice. And the background, again, appropriately blurred and overexposed, because we're dealing with the interior of a car, which is a shadowy area next to a desert sunny exterior. So it will definitely be brighter outside than it is inside the car. So this composite is really well done in that regard. Nice stuff. Oh, on this shot, the shot of the guy, I guess it's the second instance where you slow it down. There is a frame blending thing that Mark talked about. As we're seeing, it's not super smooth here. We're getting a lot of like ghosting, doubling frames. It looks kind of funny. Let me show you a little trick. So I've got that same footage loaded up in After Effects. I've slowed it down. This is the footage playing without frame blending. It's just a little bit choppy because it's at kind of a low frame rate. If you're not seeing the option for frame blending, if you go to the bottom left and you toggle these icons, and sometimes if you're like me, you have to toggle like all of them to remember which is which, because I don't just remember. Anyway, frame blending looks like a piece of film. If you click it once, what you're going to get is the effect that we saw in the example I was just looking at, where you've got some ghosting, you've got some weird like, I don't know if it's just like fading between frames. Doesn't look great. But if you click the option one more time, you would think that it would just be a toggle on and off. But no, you've got a second option with this little arrow, and it's like it's a pixel blending thing, and it's black magic, because all of a sudden that looks so much better. So when you've got subtle movement, you don't have a whole lot of quick rotation or parallax. In the case of a shot like this, where it's just a little bit of a movement of the head, this pixel blend works miracles. So just wanted to point that out, because that's kind of a theme across a lot of the submissions, is that I'm getting the sort of like fading look, which is better than, I guess, nothing. But if you click on that toggle a second time, it'll improve your life immensely. Okay, so Audra's example was very nice. Loved the tiger. Now we will see what Darren has to bring.
Move, move, move!
There goes Santa again. Move, move, move.
We know. You'd rather be in Vegas.
All right, so Darren has made some bold choices here. He's definitely thought outside the box. First of all, we're a little bit closer up to our subject, which I like in these opening shots. This one, I'm very proud of Darren here. Thinking outside the box. You don't have to constrain yourself to the billboard if you're doing a fantasy billboard anyway. And so he just bumped up the height, used like the full height of the video, which allows you to see more of these magnificent fountains, which if you've ever been to Las Vegas and seen the Bellagio fountains, they're actually super impressive. So we've got a taller billboard, got a little bit of a beveling effect here, which is looking pretty nice. It's a little exaggerated. It makes the object look maybe a little smaller than it needs to, but I like where you're going with that, Darren. And there's a little bit of a texture to the billboard too that I'm noticing, kind of a grid thing, which I didn't notice on a smaller version of the video. So it's looking really nice. So we've got our taller billboard, which also fills more of the frame, the full frame of what we're looking at. So it calls more attention to itself. It also kind of occludes this ugly second billboard back here, which is really distracting. So, really like this shot. All right, this is where Darren has really decided to just do his own thing. and make it his own. I like the integration of the Vegas sign very prominently here in the front, and it's looking nice. The roto cutting out the lights. It's, you know, you got a little bit of a fringe here. You could maybe tighten that up, but it's not super noticeable unless you pause it and like you're looking for it. So that's nice. The color balance here on the top right is a little bit blue-green compared to the rest. Everything else is a bit more purpley. The sky replacement is very dark. If it's the middle of the day, the sky is not going to look that deep blue unless you're wearing like polarized sunglasses or something. The billboard here is an interesting choice. Vibrant and eye-catching for sure. I kind of like that grid, that digital grid thing going on still. And the tiger is gigantic sitting up here on top. The glow in the middle of the midday sun is a bit much. I don't know. There's a lot going on. And I applaud the bold choice. Okay, Mark. What has Mark brought us? All right, Mark has brought us a very desert sun-washed color scheme. Things are more bleached, they're warmer. I like the look. Straightforward job with this shot. The color of the billboard is kind of washed out, matches the rest of the scene quite nicely. And if you'll notice, he's gone from, you know, a static shot or even a zoom to like physically pushing in the camera. You can see a little parallax between the foreground and the background. If you're looking at either this corner of the frame or this corner of the frame, it's most obvious, but as I rock it back and forth, you see there's some movement going on, which is definitely a unique take here, because we're like floating toward the vision of Vegas, I guess. There are some color imbalance things, mostly because the bottom is so warm and vibrant, and the top is a little bit more desaturated. And like I get the atmospheric perspective, you want things in the back to fade a little bit and the blacks to not be so black. So that looks great with the Bellagio, and it's working here. This is still maybe a bit more saturated than I would like the bus. And the billboard perhaps has a bit too much atmospheric haze over it. Mostly, I say that mostly because it's the focus of the frame. So I'd probably bring those black levels back down so it's a little darker, so the black of the billboard matches a little more closely with maybe the tiger stripes, just so it has more contrast to stand out from the hotel itself. And it matches maybe something that's coplanar with it, like the building here that's got the deep blacks. It's subjective, but I think that as far as catching your eye and drawing your eye to the center of the frame, that would be helpful. That's nitpicking a little bit because this shot is really looking nice, and that parallax stuff definitely would have taken some extra time, so way to go the extra mile there. I like the fact that the clouds are moving really quickly. It kind of adds to the fantasy element of the whole thing. Solid roto here at the end, and the background here is perfectly integrated, overexposed with the bokeh blur. Looks really nice. So solid work, Mark. Okay, what do we have here? Robert, what have you brought us?
We know. You'd rather be in Vegas.
Okay, looks like we got a little bit tired of the roto here. It's you're definitely on the right track, but I think you haven't keyframed as thoroughly because, I mean, it's a lot of keyframes. It's a lot, especially if you've already tried like 3 different methods. But we've got a good blurred background, good integration there. This shot reads a little bit dark to me, but the color cast is fairly consistent. It's just kind of a greenish thing going on. So the Vegas sign is a bit dark. I'd probably get rid of the palm trees. That would be a little bit cleaner. The billboard's fairly desaturated, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because video on a billboard can be whatever it is. So, but I think maybe preserving a bit more of that color would help draw our attention to it a little bit more. Here's an example of the light post not being masked out. And Robert, you're not the only one to do this. I'm not trying to call you out. But the light post here is supposed to be in front of the billboard. So that's the sort of thing that sometimes you miss. That's why I'm here, to point that sort of thing out. I like the border on the billboard here. it kind of grounds the video in a physical object, which I think works. Yeah, again, we are early in this course, so a lot of these things you will look back on in a few weeks like, oh yeah, I would definitely do that differently, or there's an easier way to do that. So there's a lot that's good, some things that could use improvement. What else is new? Moving on, we've got Ryan.
We know. You'd rather be in Vegas.
All right, so Ryan's done a couple things that I am a fan of here. First off, he's cropped in a little bit, so we're definitely focused more on the billboard itself in this first shot. These feathered edges on the video aren't really doing it for me, mostly because physical objects don't have feathered edges, so to have the billboard be feathered is not quite working for me. But that isn't really the focus of the shot. So yeah, just knock the feather down on your mask a little bit, and this shot starts working even better. A fun touch here is as our character is looking to the right, Ryan has added a little bit of a whip pan to sort of match the guy's vision as he looks over. Ryan has gone with a bit more blur in the background. Although physically a blur like that, it would be really hard to achieve if you're talking about the distances involved and like a physical camera. I like the placement of the tiger down below. That's kind of fun. We also have kind of a rosier color palette, which is fun. And this little, just the subtle, simple animation of the logo at the end is a really nice professional touch. Background is well integrated. The roto on the head needs a little bit of work. We've got some edges, some edge contamination that I'd clean up. But the roto on the money is looking very nice. A lot of good stuff going on here. Okay, our last example for the day comes from Stone.
You'd rather be in Vegas.
All right, so there is a lot going on here. Noticeably, we've got some camera moves, a little bit of a snap zoom going on, which use snap zooms judiciously. They're not always the best, but they're working pretty well, and it definitely brings your attention to the center of the frame. Kind of a fun addition of some text here, which I would say it's a little bit cheesy, but we're talking about Vegas here, so cheesy doesn't exist. And I like the fact that the billboard is a little bit more washed out toward the edge. It kind of looks like a natural glare from a sunlit day. From a compositing standpoint, that's a really solid look. The text adds a bit more story. Oh, the second zoom feels a bit unnecessary. If I were to get rid of any of the zooms in this piece, it would be the second one. This is kind of a fun effect, having it out of focus and kind of going in and out, almost like you're blinking your eyes and trying to understand this mirage, this vision that's appeared in front of you. And yeah, the text is kind of fun, a fun addition to the piece. Really nice integration of the Vegas elements, and getting rid of that second building from the original footage gives you a little bit more room to play with your Vegas Caesar's Palace and the Eiffel Tower and stuff. So this looks really nice. A little green in the shadows here at the bottom. Not super worried about that. This is an opportunity to introduce some of that atmospheric perspective, by which I mean you pull up the black levels so the blacks in the background are not quite so dark, which gives you that illusion that there's, particulate matter in the distance. Because you look at things that are really far away, nothing is ever completely black in the distant background. Just because of things in the air, little particles that reflect light, the farther away you get, the less profound the blacks can be. But I really like the originality of this take. Stone has done a really good job here. And the roto looks pretty good on the money. And the background is appropriately overexposed and blurred. I love that. The edge of the car here is perhaps too blurred. I would keep those masks a little bit sharper because the car itself is still in focus. Or should still be mostly in focus. But yeah, I like the desert color scheme. I like the The camera moves are a little crazy, a little exaggerated, but they're not bad, and they really add to the piece, and they kind of go along with the kitsch that is Las Vegas. So that's it. The tracking mark is more of a place to celebrate the good work you've done. If I get in the weeds with the details, forgive me, I'm sometimes still in like the critique mode because that's what I have to do a dozen times a day. I really like what you guys have been submitting, and I hope to see just as many submissions next week. Hey everybody, welcome to the first week of the tracking mark. I'm Nate, your TA. You've probably seen me lurking on Facebook and have received feedback from me on your homework so far. So this is what I sound like. What we're doing here is simply looking at some examples of your work, and so you can see what your peers have been doing and show off a little bit. Now, if you submitted the QTV project and you don't see yours, that means that I'm showing your example from the second project, and you'll see that later on. So I'm trying to get everybody who submitted some screen time. Well, let's jump right in. First example we've got queued up here is Philip. I'm going in no particular order, but Philip, let's see what you got.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
Alrighty, nice job, Philip, kicking us off here. What I'm seeing here is a nice, straightforward edition of this project. One of the things that I like most about this submission is the animated monkey and spool of thread here at the end.
QTV, the network for...
It's always fun to see little touches like that, and also it gives our character something to look at. Now you might notice that we've got a little bit of the Swiss cheese apron going on here, and that's something that we'll figure out how to deal with in upcoming videos if you're not already familiar with maybe patching your green screen job with a mask in areas where you've got green on the apron and green on the green screen. What do? Just draw a little mask around the apron and animate it as she moves across the screen, and you'll take care of that problem. So we've got some nice animation of the logo and the other elements going on here. So good job to Phil. Sorry if you can hear the sound of my computer taking off into orbit. When I'm doing a screen capture, it tends to tax the machine a little bit. Okay, our second example is from Lawrence, and let's just, I'll shut up and we can just watch.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
All right, what stands out to me about this example is our little pulling away shot here. We've got a nice little camera move. We've got a little parallax going on. Elements moving. The sewing machine's maybe moving a little too fast there, but that's not a big problem. That's just a very satisfying move to watch going back and forth. Again, we've got the Swiss cheese apron. We've got a little bit of a harsh color cast on our character. Not the end of the world. We can figure that out. Again, this is our first example, so these are examples for a lot of you guys. This is your first time attempting something like this, and so I'm impressed. Nice job. Okay, next we've got Jonathan. As you can already see, he's made a bit of a bold choice here, changing up the color of the background. I love it.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
So this example is all about the surprises. Surprise, we're going with a purple background. Surprise, there's nothing there. Surprise, the logo comes in from the left. So here we go. That's a very original take on the exercise. So I like the originality with Jonathan's submission. Good job. Okay, now Jolyn.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
All right, what jumps out to me here is the animation of the sewing machine. There are a few of you that pulled that off. This is, I think, the first example that was submitted that included that, which is a fun touch. And it's just pounding away there at nothing. Again, with the parallax and the pullback. There's a couple of weird things going on with the edge of the Q here, a little discoloration or something. I'm not too concerned about it right now, but I know this was the hardest part for a lot of you of the whole project. It's maddening to deal with this elbow here. And there were a lot of different solutions. A lot of people went with the, hey, let's make it actually rest on the letter. Some of you went with compositing the arm behind the Q. Not really a right or wrong way to do it. But yeah, this is an example of being given footage that doesn't do you any favors. Okay, moving on to Catherine.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
All right, Catherine went with a more straightforward approach on this wide shot, but it's a solid composition, and I love the touch here at the beginning of putting the stack of fabric here on the left and having our talent walk out from behind it. That is visually interesting. And I think Catherine is the only student to have done this particular thing, so there's some originality points. Solid key, and yeah, compositing the arm behind the queue, which looks pretty clean. Nice job. Okie dokie, our final example of the QTV spot comes from Andy.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
We've got a whole lot going on in this wide shot, as we've got a little bit of a bouncing ball animation going on with our spool of thread. Some nice motion blur as well. And each little item has some time to slide into frame. And as with most examples, there's some good blur going on in the background, kind of separate our foreground and background and our focus area. This stupid elbow. I'm so sorry that you had to deal with that. Okay, so nice job. That is the QTV Ultimate Fudge Factor exercise.
Now, your Vegas assignment had a lot to deal with in it. And it's important to remember a couple of things. One, all we're working on at this point in terms of what we've actually gone over is roto. So that would be animated masks, roto brush. We got into procedural stuff a little bit with extract where applicable, but there was more needed than that in the scene. And there were even things that I actually didn't anticipate. But I can see that a lot of people ran into trouble with this shot. And specifically, if we look at it one frame at a time, and 1, 2, 3, yeah, there's like 3 repeat frames. Well, turns out, if we reveal the timing on the shot, which is a set of controls you may have never revealed, these little brackets here, it's stretched to almost 300%. And it's an uneven stretch. And this is straight from Premiere Pro. So by bringing the project directly from Premiere, this is what you got. The thing is that generally for professional work, we don't really want it to work that way. Now, granted, Quentin Tarantino likes this effect, but here's what we would do, especially in this case, because it's going to work probably pretty well. Let's see. So select the layer. And under the frame blending controls, which if you're mostly an animator, you may not have really run up against. You animate on 2s deliberately, let's say. This is like animated on 3s, not deliberately. So what we're going to do is turn that on right there. At the top, my tooltip calls this frame blending. And there are 3 different settings. By default, it's off. This one is going to do pixel analysis, that icon right there. This one is going to just, in a more brute force way, blend frames. So I'm going to go to this one. And this particular shot is a great candidate for this because the movement is very well defined and gradual. So if it was like, if we were looking at the ocean, that would be a problem. Waves, a lot of detail, a lot of motion blur, those kind of things would be difficult. This is very crisp and clear motion going very slowly. And I'm going to zoom in here because this is almost invisible. Like, can you tell which are the original frames and which are the fabricated ones? No, but again, if you couldn't see it clearly, if I turn this off, without it, it's repeating a bunch of frames. And let's just try the frame kind of cross blending mode. This one's okay too. I think that in motion, it's still gonna look kind of jittery. And often this setting, which is using the equivalent of the time warp effect, isn't gonna do such an awesome job. So beware. Okay, so that was kind of an unfair thing. That was meant to be a gotcha. It just was a thing that snuck in here. But I will say that if you work with editorial, they will do stuff like this all the time. And they will expect that the After Effects artist be the one to fix it because we've got way better tools. We've got time remapping and we have these elegant options. So just be aware of it. Next thing in this particular example, this student did an awesome job of composing this shot, and as did everyone, actually. I think everyone was making this shot their own as a designer, and I would encourage you to go even further with that. Now, in this case, what was nice about this is there was this sort of lighting awkwardness where the light is clearly kind of coming from above and to the right, even though you only get a couple hints of it. But still, if you're looking, you can see it. And now the building actually basically matches that. So that's great. Other students solved it by lowering the contrast. That's fine. The thing is, if you're going to take over the scene as a designer, you could go ahead and even fix things that are a little distracting, like whatever the heck is going on over here. I think the billboard could just extend out to cover that. Generally, I found that this part of the frame is just so jumbly, and it was a problem I had from the beginning that makes this, again, somewhat of an unforgiving set of shots to work on, or at least this master shot, because when you shoot something intentionally as opposed to using stock footage, you are careful to compose the shot in a certain way and be very intentional about what's going to be in it. So again, we're only just learning about some basic things here. Now, here is the first of a few examples we'll see of inserting the tiger, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. With this particular example, I wanted to also just call out this comp at the end. So the camera lens blur effect, which I'll reset here, you can use it just by increasing the blur radius, which is initially what this student did. And then the other thing you would obviously do is repeat edge pixels. And that's good in the sense that you can see that the door is already out of focus. He's in very shallow depth of field. So whatever's behind him should be way out. And we even have other references, because if we look at the non-composited shots, they're very soft and they've got bokeh effects. There's bloom happening to the highlights. Here, with the effect at this default setting, we're not getting as much of that bloom, but you can add it. So I'm going to raise the gain a bit. If you don't raise the gain at all, you're not going to see the effect. But then what you want to do is lower the threshold here, and you're going to see things start to blow out back there. And in this particular shot, the sky was already overexposed in white, so I'm not going to push too hard on this one. The saturation is, if you're doing something like, say, blurring out lighting, like neon, you might need to try to boost the saturation. That is looking a little bit more blown out the way that the other shots in here are. One other thing I want to point out, this student got a really nice head roto using RotoBrush. There's this funny thing going on over here where the student punted and left this soft kind of blob, which, honestly, I didn't pick it immediately. I don't think you'd get away with this with a client, but it was not a bad solution to cut it short on this one. There was a fine roto of the rearview mirror. The issue was with the money. Now, I'm going to tell you that he flicks the money 4 times in the shot, and the money's got solid edges. So that, as a roto, once you're experienced, would probably be 15 or 20 minutes. But at the same time, I respect all of you working on this. You had to prioritize, you had to choose, pick your battles. What did you want to work on? And so really every set of shots had compromises like this in it, because there were a lot of things that you could kind of finesse to death in here. This example has a very strong color look on it. The way this was achieved was with the curves effect. I have these open over here. And, I applaud this in that the student wanted to try to give this really specific look. So that's what it looks like without it. You're familiar with that. And this is with. Now, the thing with color correction on the first pass is about matching and about optimizing. But then you get into color looks, which is this territory that we're in here. And with color looks, it's a whole different ballgame of what is the style and the feel and the emotion of what you're creating. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is create a feeling with a color look. Now, in this case, when I look at this, I see kind of a vintage look. Honestly, this feels like kind of a 1960s kind of film process going on here. Not 100%, but the way it's kind of pale and muted, and this was carried through on all the shots. I also see this is very high contrast here in the wide. So again, this feels kind of like what a 1960s film process would have done. This also looks kind of that way. I don't know why this particular project would call for that, but I just wanted to recognize the student doing this. The other thing I would say is I personally don't do this work with levels and curves almost ever, unless you know exactly what you're going for. Doing it with curves is going to be kind of tough. I would say that this succeeded in terms of it does consistently have this specific kind of look to it. When we look at these individual shots, and again, I'm bypassing the tiger for now. We're going to go back and talk about the roto brush on the tiger. But let's just zoom in here and remember that zoomed in is effectively how your shots are when they end up on an HD monitor. Now you can see kind of the problems here. So the billboard is softer than what's behind it, and that should not be. And the roto around the sign, I think the student just ran out of time to deal with the lights and was probably trying to do them in kind of an automated way, and it didn't really work out. So that is a little more challenging, but solving the focal depth problem is one that you do actually want to take care of and not let things be sort of like the sign in this case is pretty far out of focus. So why is the building less so and the sign in sharp focus? Likewise, on this last shot, there's just no depth of field at all. The mat around the car door is a little chunky. So I think this was mostly a timing thing, but also probably not an awareness of camera lens blur or how or why to use it. I would also note that the logo in this case doesn't match the look that was applied to the rest of this. The logo is much more saturated now than the look that was in the shot, or rather in the whole sequence. And I don't know. For me, I doubt that this client would probably want this look, but it's all experimentation, right? Okay, in this case, I wanted to point out that I can tell if you haven't frozen your roto brush, which the previous examples did, because of how long it takes to bring up a frame. So do that. We've got this issue with the interlacing on this shot, and boy, I think I'm going to actually have to call that one out because that's also not good, and it's kind of weird that this shot had this. Now, maybe it was such a low budget job that they're not going to fuss over it. It's probably the case because honestly, you're only going to get this nowadays if you're using stock footage as we were. But these lines are used to create more frames when shooting, and almost nobody shoots that way now, even as opposed to a decade ago. Cameras will record every other line to help with data rates, or they used to. Most cameras don't need to do that anymore. So the way to solve this is to go into interpret footage. And now, unfortunately, you're left to mess around. Now, if you haven't looked through these settings very closely, one thing we could do here, notice the frame numbers, if you can see them down here at the bottom, are ridiculously large. This thing is starting at a frame that is over 1 million. So you could set that to 0. And if I say, okay, now my frame numbers look normal. And it reset my view. So this is gonna be a little bit of a back and forth where it's resetting my view every time I mess with this. But I wanna zoom it in like this so you can see it. I'm gonna go back to interpret footage because what we weren't trying to solve was not the starting time code. I'm just pointing out that that's there, but the field. So first thing I'm gonna do is click on this guess pull down thing. And ideally, I would have this position so I could just look at it rather than having to repo it every time. So maybe I'll just try it like that. there's still a problem. So that didn't work. So I'm going to undo and try again. This time I'm just going to say separate fields, and I'll just pick one. Let's go with upper, and let's try lower. Okay, lower looks like it kind of solved the problem on this frame. So now that looks more like a normal frame without all the stripiness, right? And there are repeat frames happening here. So I think what actually happened, this is so messed up, but stock footage, and the frames look like they're out of order. It looks like this went through a couple different passes and got messed up. It should not be behaving like this. So this is a case where you kind of gotta hope nobody notices. But again, the problem here is I think this went through 2 different render passes, and somebody at some point added these fields to it, and that was terrible. So I would say this is better because you don't get those lines, even though it's gonna be weird. You can see how it kind of jumps back and forth, but hopefully nobody's looking at that. And hopefully you never see this again. The lights in this case are very successful. So let's just take a look at how that was done. So we are talking about lots of little masks. Looks painstaking, but if you look a little closer, you can see that you could duplicate and reposition the same mask a lot when it's linear. And yeah, you have to rotate it when you go around the corner. But again, one of those ones that initially is like, oh, that's not gonna be fun. I don't wanna do that. Like, won't Rotobrush do it? But in fact, it's a static shot. And so this was a great solution. Here's a case where the student was organizing layers, motion graphics style. So everything in the master comp. And these are individual shots. So I appreciate it when I'm reviewing these that the other ones we looked at were actually divided into shots as pre-comps. But that's not really the most important thing here. So the thing I wanted to call out in this case is just the general composition here. The building has had its contrast lowered so that you don't notice the lighting kind of oddities as much. If we zoom in, the focal stuff isn't as pronounced a problem here. So there's some softness around things. So it's not really standing out as much. The tiger actually is a little bit lost down here. So that's more of a design choice to stick the tiger down at the bottom where honestly, you're probably not gonna see that fella. And this lamppost here, which you all had to deal with, let me just solo this for a moment. So this was done with a mask, which is great, but there's also a Rotobrush effect on here, and it kind of looks like maybe there was an attempt to Rotobrush and then punting to masking. I'm not sure that the Rotobrush is really doing anything here. Let's just look at it in the main comp, and it is costing time, as you can see there. You know, so the issues would be, is the lamppost moving? And if so, is it enough that you really need to consider Rotobrush? And I think the answer was no here. So even if it weren't a locked off shot or the wind got the thing or whatever, it's much better not to rely on a Rotobrush. And I'd say that overall, I want to encourage you guys not to rely overly on Rotobrush. I know you live in the future and you want to have tools that just automatically take care of your roto for you today. But today, Rotobrush is not quite that tool just yet. In this shot, by the way, I wanted to also point out that the shot looks good. The contrast on the billboard is low, while the scene was adjusted to have rather high contrast. So that's a little bit of a mismatch. In this student's work, one thing that I wanted to call out is the change of the sign to say Las Vegas Boulevard. And I think that this student even went and got this image because it's green rather than blue, which I'm guessing is probably accurate. And later in the course, I'm going to describe to you what I call the kiss of love. And this would be an example of a little detail that the client would probably never ask for, but is pretty nifty. Now, here's something I really like. The tiger is gigantic, And this is a great opportunity to say that I'm not always about realism. This was a design project, this shot in particular, and it's meant to feel surreal and kind of like a collage or a montage or whatever the French word is that would suit it. So I'm down. And the tiger here looks good. Let's take a look at the rotobrush on this one. I think the rotobrushing was generally pretty good. Now, it is frozen, which is great. Freeze button right there for those of you who missed it. Save yourself a lot of time. I'll look at the alpha channel, and this allows me to point something out, which is, this is soft here. Now let's just open that effect, F3, and turn it off. So the real one has a pretty hard edge. There's a slight amount of softness, nothing like that amount of softness. So this actually lets me talk about a mistake that artists make, and I'm talking like artists who paint or draw, which is if in your head you think you know how the thing should look, you make it look like that. But here we have reference built right into the shot that it's not meant to be that soft. So sure, along the bottom, we might want a harder line. I'll reset the feather in Rotobrush. And yeah, that's a lumpy looking line. So we could clean that up just by adding a mask along the bottom of the billboard where he's lying. And okay, you could have a bit more feather, but it was set at 72, which is a lot. We got this nice detail because Rotobrush lets me look at the strokes. Here, I'll use the Uber key. I can say that, yeah, we've got a bunch of edge refinement strokes. So this was done the way that I was advising you to do it, where you make the main outline and then you do some edge refinement right around where you've got little shaggy bits. Nice work.
Mark, the tracking mark. Mark it. Track it.
Howdy. This is my lucky comping hat. I come from a long line of ranchers in California, and I found that my keys tend to be a little cleaner when I wear this thing. Oh, that's funny. I didn't even realize I was holding this. In any case, this is the first episode of The Tracking Mark, a weekly recap show where we'll take a look at some of your session's work and go a little bit deeper into each topic we've covered. We'll start with the QTV exercise, which was really just a fun way to give you a benchmark to look back on at the end of the class. Let's take a look at some examples and preview some of the topics you'll be learning in the course. That's it for episode 1. Check back next week for another riveting episode of The Tracking Mark, starring me, Mark.
Mark, the tracking mark. Mark it. Track it. Mark, the tracking mark.
The Vegas exercise was your first real challenge, intended to give you some practice using masks, compositing various elements together in a realistic way, and using some powerful After Effects tools to separate objects from their background. As you're already discovering, there are plenty of gotchas when you do things like this, so let's take a look at some work and see what else we can learn.
Okay, exercise 1, really unreal. This one is a bit of a curveball from our side because there's so many new techniques you guys need to get in there to finish this project. And a lot of time you need to figure out which one is the best for the problem you're trying to solve. So yeah, let's just look at 2 students on this one, starting with Ashley. And let's play it. Okay, well done, Ashley. Let's get into it. So this first shot, pretty easy, just to lock that down. Here, nice integration, not too many trouble. I feel like it goes a little bit to the purple pink, a little bit, the color on the billboard. But then let's get into the real thing. This is an issue with a lot of people. And I think it's a Mark, when he goes onto it, he just suggests to go on the first frame blending option. If you check that box one more time, you get frame blending that actually create new frames from the existing ones and get a smoother, a really smoother slow motion. Here, there's a little bit of weird things happening when if you check that, it should be a lot smoother. And here we go. So let's just go through it a bit. So I think you got a couple issues here. Well, first off, I want to say your tiger is pretty amazing. You did really well and got even that the top right ear has a tendency to disappear a bit, and you did a great job getting that in nicely. I would add some shadow again to help that contact with the billboard. But otherwise, I love the color. I think it's really standing out pretty nicely there. Again, the integration with the billboard is good. Where we have some issues is in here in that bush. I think you used RotoBrush, if I remember correctly, and that's not really the best tool for this. I think you're going to have better luck using Extract. And then having something like a refined hard matte on top. Some other students I've seen pretty smart in a smart way would cut off the top, and by just blending the colors enough with the background, you would get away with that. But yeah. Otherwise, your lights on the sign of Vegas have a bit of an issue as well. And again, I think you went for RotoBrush as well, which it's a great tool, and I think we just introduced it in that exercise, and that's why a lot of people tend to go for that. But here it might not be the best solution. Here it's how it's eating a little bit on the side there. For this, you're better off masking a single light bulb and then duplicate it around the whole sign. I've seen a few students do that, which I think is just a really smart way to do this. Otherwise, you did a stellar job cutting out all the little bits and pieces here, which I don't think, it's not the most obvious thing, but it's the little things that make that shot a bit better, to see that water splashing from underneath the billboard. No, that's really good. On the back, I would add just a touch of blur to make this blend a little bit better together. And that's pretty good. Here, that money shot. Okay, I need to commend you guys for making that one frame by frame roto all the way. It's really, really amazing. And from the previous sessions we had, a lot of people were trying to sneak around, trying to use a RotoBrush or Extract or different ways. But there is really not a simple way around keying this. I think you have one issue, here, a one frame problem with a mask, looks like. But other than that, it's really, really clean. And that's just great. You guys' forehead is pretty good. I think it might sink a little bit. Oh, there's a little bit of chatter. Again, I think that's from RotoBrush. The issue is if you don't use RotoBrush, you would use a mask, and then you would really have to manage that mask with a lot of keyframes. Otherwise, that's really good. Your background is nice and blurred. I think the edge is really nice on the car. You did a really good job there. Just forgot that top right corner, but that might be because you were submitting your homework super late. So not a big deal, but just make sure to get rid of this. Otherwise, great job. I think that's looking pretty good. Just a couple fixes to be done. Okay, and our next one would be from Mark. Mark did a pretty stellar job, so I'll let that play and you guys would see.
We know. You'd rather be in Vegas.
Okay. So I just think it's pretty hilarious with the sky replacement and everything. It works very well. So again, nice looking down this shot. Then we have a nice integration there. Nothing too crazy. Here we have your... I love this, that you went for that. Having a gradation in your color correction. That's like as the sky is turning red, you see that affecting the character, which is great. Makes them feel more like in a single space. And there we go, madness ensues. This is amazing. I really like. You have a really detailed lights. Went with the mask for the whole contour of it. That's great. Your tiger is really good. Again, I would add a little bit of shadow here. Your ears, even on the tiger, are really nice. What I was saying is here you can see there is some the water fountain from the Bellagio on the back are splashing here, but not on the left. So it's like it's the kind of the details. If you really want to dig into it, you could cut out everything. But otherwise it's pretty good. On this side, you did that trick where you like cut out the top, and it does fit pretty well. Not having those bushes waving on top is a lot less work to deal with. Cutting that out. Your background elements on those, I feel like they're almost a little too blurred. Just maybe reducing that blur a tad. But that's really good. And here again, the money shot. It's just pretty great. The frame by frame that you guys did. That's looking good. Really great work on the head as well. That's really, really neat. And I think I told you that in your critique was the sky now goes the same direction as the shot we just saw. And if you want to make it feel like a reverse shot, I would try to invert the speed so it's going actually away from the camera here, just to help that a little bit. And we even got some animation there. Sweet. No, I really think Mark, you did a great job. And that's also something I wanted to talk to you guys about. If you ever feel stuck or like don't know how to solve an issue, you can first ask people on Facebook. That's always a good idea. And also go through the homework locker. Everybody that upload their homework, they're all available for every other students. So if you think somebody made an amazing job at keying something out, just go into their project and see what they used, if there's like some special tool or techniques they had and anything like this. That's always helpful to see how other visual effects artists work and like what works and what doesn't. So that's my tip of the day. Anyway, I think you guys did all a great job, and I'm looking forward to see how you face the roto exercise. Have a great day. Signing out. Hey everyone, this is Vivian, and welcome to the very first tracking mark. It was really nice to meet you all on the Facebook group and see your very first few exercises. Now the tracking mark is going to be about every week. I'm going to go through a couple students' homework and critique them and see what everyone can take away from those. Okay, let's dig into it. I'm going to start with Alex's homework. And let's play it through and see what I can say about that.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
Okay, well done, Alex. So first off, I want to say it's a pretty decent key, just a little strong. That's an issue a lot of people had, and that's totally normal, being your first exercise on the course. And there is 2 lessons dedicated to keying that are coming up soon. So you'll learn so much more about that, and especially about how to deal with hair and keep all the details in there. Otherwise, I think you did a pretty good job with the skirt. There is a little bit of holes here and there because your mask wasn't great on it. So make sure when you do the roto to always adjust it as she moves around. Here you're losing a little bit of it. But other than that, good catch on actually getting the skirt in there. I like how your background element is blurred. I love that you went for blue. I think it's great to like make the exercise your own because everybody gets the same assets and the same footage. So I think it's great to just make it a little different. Okay, this one. I think you did a pretty good job with layering the blur, having less blur on the elements that are really close to the subject in distance to the camera. And more on the back and in the front. That's really good. Same issues here. There's a little bit of holes in her skirt. What else? Oh yes. So on this one, the cue still like has the shadow of the TV all the time, when the TV only pops by the end. So make sure to like adapt that at the same time. So have no shadow right here, and then have it grow up there. The best for that might be to do your own shadows. So get rid of the one under the cue, either by doing a mask or you can also get rid of the shadows using curves. If you go in the alpha setting and just crank it up so you don't see any transparency in your element, it would kill all the shadows. I really like that you animated the sewing machine. Just looks a little too much like a hammer, when you would like to have a constant speed on those. Other than that, that's pretty good. I like what you did with the shadow here. Just have the shadow on the tip of the foot only, on the back foot. Other than that, it's pretty good. Yeah, no, I think you did a pretty good job. Well done, Alex. Let's see what Victoria has been doing. So Victoria went all fancy on hers. I'll play it and let's talk about it after.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
Yeah, that's a great one. So again, making it your own, like adding reflections everywhere and playing with that would really just make it a little different and like add an additional challenge to it. I think your sewing machine is working great. Nice blur on it as well. You did a really good job with the skirt following it along. Yeah, it's really good. Same with your keys, really nice. It is still a little strong and like gets rid of some details in her hair. But at the same time, it's a really decent key, so I don't want to be too harsh. Here, and I think it was the same for the previous one, I would love to see a shadow on the cue when she put her elbow on it. That would really help the contact and make it feel like it's in the same space. I like that you have a small dolly out and dolly in. I would do both in the same direction, just so it's like helps the cut as well, but that's just me. Here's pretty much what I was saying is whatever you have, if you have an element coming at the same time as the TV, just make those match. I think the reflection works great there. Might be cheating a little bit because you're using Video Copilot's plugin, but hey, if it works, go for it. And nice having the motion blur on that monkey coming down and motion blur on the TV as well. Yeah, that's always good. If you have anything moving in your scene, just check the motion blur box. Unless it's like demanding way too much resources, then you could use a fast box blur or something like that. If it's just a small element like that, that would really help make it look like it was shot with the camera, which is most of what we're doing here. Okay, I think that was a really neat job. One thing though is if your floor is not a perfect mirror, you would still see some shadows under there. So unless it's like 100% reflective, you would still need to add a little bit of something under there, which, I mean, it's not 100% reflective since you have color and everything. So yeah, you could add that. But other than that, great job, Victoria. Let's look now at Yuki's homework. Let's just play it.
There's a network for people who know what a fat quarter is. QTV, the network for quilters.
So Yuki, I really like the fact that you really made it his own stage, like added different textures, some more assets and everything. I think it does add to it. Then there's a couple issues on your key with that harsh, like the dark outline around there. And I think it's around here. You're losing even, your key is so strong, you're even taking away her eye a bit because it's reflecting the green environment. So yeah, you learned so much more in week 3 with the 2 lessons dedicated to it. So just be mindful of that and make sure you take notes during your the next week. And here again, a couple holes here, and here as well. So make sure the mask follows nicely. Same thing, I would add a shadow there to help that contact. And here, I think you did a pretty good job with the layering of the blur, just having a little bit more blur on the spool of thread. And your shadows are green. So for that, I would just cut them out and add your own shadows with a solid and a mask so you can really control exactly what you want to do. Yeah, and no shadows on her feet when you should have one there. But yeah, other than that, that's pretty great. Well done, everyone. I know that first one was a bit of a tough one, and you'll learn so much more techniques to like. You'll be flying through an exercise like that in a couple of weeks from now. So if that was a bit scary for you, don't worry too much. And yeah, let's see you guys very soon. Bye.